Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Pat Peschman, and I'm a volunteer with the Minnesota State Horticultural Society. I'm here online tonight with Amanda Yadav, who's going to be talking to us about growing microgreens at home. Amanda is a Minnesota native who grew up in a family of gardeners and started growing microgreens to keep her green thumb in shape during the long Minnesota winters. She now owns Fiddlehead Farm, LLC, and grows a menu of over 45 different varieties of microgreens for restaurants, co-ops, and farmers markets in the Twin Cities area. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we start. You are attending in webinar mode, in listen-only mode. We can't see you, we can't hear you. So you'll be able to hear our presenter, but we can't hear you. If you have any questions for our presenter, you can type those on the questions panel on the right side of your screen. We will cover questions at the end of the webinar. If you don't see the panel, look for the orange arrow that's pointing to the right in your screen's upper right corner. Just click on that arrow and it'll pop out a panel, and you should be able to see the questions box then. So thank you for joining us tonight. Amanda, take it away.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be back again here with the Minnesota State Horticultural Society. I think this is the second or maybe third webinar that I've done with you guys. It's always a lot of fun. So I have a slideshow, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a planting demonstration at the end, do a little bit of harvesting, a little bit of show and tell. And so during the slideshow, it kind of goes through the process of where I started, how to plant microgreens, some tips and tricks, a lot of the common questions that I get at farmers markets, things that go wrong. There's a lot of people that have tried microgreens and it didn't go as well as they'd hoped. So I want you to be able to leave this webinar and go try grow microgreens and be successful. So if you have any questions, write them down, put them in the chat, and we'll have lots of time to go over that. And hopefully, you can leave feeling really good about everything with microgreens. So I'm gonna share my screen here, just a minute. All right. So about the farm, Fiddlehead Farm, I started probably about 5 years ago. And like she said, I grow a menu of, right now it's about 30 to 40 different microgreen and herb varieties. I also grow edible flowers in the summertime. I do grow a little bit of them in the wintertime indoors as well, just to kind of keep some of my plants growing. I'm not certified organic, but I do grow organically with sustainability in mind. So from the seeds that I buy to the soils that I use, and even some of the containers that I use, that's kind of all taken into account with what I do. So I call myself kind of a full circle farm, where the spent microgreen mats are given to the chickens. The chickens provide the fertilizer or the poop for the edible flower beds and the other beds in my garden, and then flowers and all of that go to the restaurants. So I use, for growing, I currently use mostly like a ProMix peat moss type growing medium. There's lots of different options that we're going to go through, but just for me, that one works the best. And I currently have you probably will see behind me a silver rack, and that's one similar to what I use in my farm. And we produce over about 100 trays a week of microgreens. Yes, 100 trays a week, that's a lot. And you can find our microgreens at coming up at the White Bear Lake Winter Farmers Market. I'm there every winter. And then we also do quite a bit of work with restaurants. That's kind of the main revenue stream for the farm right now is the restaurants. All right. So you wanted to learn how to grow microgreens. And there's more than one way to grow, and that's okay. And you're probably, if you've looked into growing microgreens, you're probably overwhelmed and confused. And to be honest, that's okay. But as far as what you need, it's pretty basic. You need a container, some type of growing medium, some type of seed, water, and light. And that container, it can be basically any container available. The roots don't need to go very deep. The trays that I use are only, I think they're 1-inch deep trays. I've used some deeper trays, but with the 1-inch deep, I don't even fill them all the way with the growing medium. So the tray that you use or container or pot, the depth, it doesn't need to be very deep. A berry container will work just fine. The growing medium, you don't want to use like a compost or garden soil. You want to use something that's really light and fluffy. So I use like a sterile seed germination mix, potting mix, or coco coir. It should be really light and fluffy. You can also use hydroponic mats, or they sell grow screens now too that I've seen. And then you need seed. High quality seed is key with microgreens. And as far as getting seed, I recommend True Leaf Market, Johnny's. I'm trying to think, high mowing seeds. But what you want to look for is something that says that it is either untreated non-GMO or something that specifically says microgreen or sprouting seed. So there's going to be no difference in the seed if you get like a microgreen seed or a sprouting seed. Those are going to be this. It's going to be the same broccoli seed. What's going to be different about that between a sprouting seed and say a garden seed would be that a garden seed might be treated with some preservation chemicals to keep it from molding in the packet or something like that. So that's really important. And also with seeds, don't be afraid to buy a lot. When we go through the planting demo, I'll show you how many seeds we use for one little pot of microgreens, and you might be a little bit surprised and shocked if you're a standard gardener who likes to space things and pull things out when they get too crowded in the garden there, because this might send you into a little bit of a sweat. And then you're going to need water and light. So microgreens, they don't need a ton of light. I can grow a little pot just in a kitchen window and it does just fine. It might be the stems might be a little bit longer than if you were to use a light, but any type of moderate indirect light is going to be great. You don't want to grow microgreens outdoors in direct sun. They're very delicate and they will wither and die in a matter of minutes probably. It's pretty impressive how much they don't like that. Watering your microgreens. They don't require a lot of water. So for like a 3 or 4 inch pot, I only use about 1 to 3 tablespoons a day. So that's really not a lot. If you overwater your microgreens, they will get moldy. They will get moldy really fast. And we'll look at some pictures of some pretty intense mold and can see what the difference between mold and root hairs is. So those are going to be the 4 things that you need to grow microgreens. There's nothing super special about the container that you need. The growing medium, there's different options for whatever you like. I usually start people with like a seed starting mix, like a pro mix or a coco coir, just because it holds water a lot better than like a hydroponic mat. And one of the things that I see a lot with people is they forget to water. So the hydroponic mat is a really great option if you want to be able to, if you want to watch your microgreens a lot. So this is a picture of the Pro Mix type bale that I use. It's really light and fluffy once you break that bale apart. It is also really dry. And so if you find that it's too dry for you, you can always add some coco coir to hold in some moisture. And again, compost or garden soil, it's too heavy for microgreens. They have very delicate root system, so you don't want to be using anything like that. So if you haven't heard of coco coir, it's really kind of cool. It's the natural outer husk of a coconut, and you can find it in garden centers, and it's usually in like a compressed puck or a brick form. And it's super dehydrated, and all you have to do is add water and it puffs up, and it's a great medium for growing microgreens. It's super fluffy, it holds water like the dickens, and the microgreens usually just love it. So this here is a picture of microgreens on a hydroponic mat, and these microgreens have just been growing for probably, if I had to guess, I would say, oh, they got some leaves on them, so I would say probably about 5 days. They're still pretty small, but you can see here that the roots, they can't penetrate into the mat. So it's just a little bit trickier for them on some of these than versus like the coco coir or the seed starting mix. So that's why I always start my beginners on that seed starting mix. It's a pretty successful way to go. And I am going to pause the screen sharing here. And I'm going to show you a couple. I got a little bit of glare there. Trained it. I'm going to show you kind of what the seed starting mix and what the coco coir looks like. So this right here is the seed starting mix. This is the Pro Mix. And you can see how like dry and light and fluffy that is. And the microgreens are really the roots are gonna go into that really nicely, and they're gonna love it. And then this right here is a small coco coir puck. This is what I use in my grow cups. And so I've got this grow cup here. It's just an 8-ounce, it's actually just an 8-ounce chili cup. That's all it is. It's a compostable soup cup. But this is hydrated. So I filled this about halfway with water, and it just puffs up. And again, it's really fine, kind of, it's nice to touch. If you like dirt, it's kind of fun. So that's kind of the dirt scene as far as microgreens go. Go back to the slides here. So now that you've got a container, you've got some type of soil or something to grow them on, you need to think about seeds. We talked a little bit about looking for untreated either sprouting or microgreen seeds, and that's going to be key. Like I said, they're going to end up to be the same thing. The difference between sprouts and microgreens, I get this question, actually got this question right before the webinar started, and it's a good one because it comes up a lot. A sprout is it's the same vegetable as a microgreen. It's the same broccoli as you're going to get in the full size. So it's just stages of growth. So a sprout is going to be like 1 to 3 days, and it's grown with no soil and no light. Microgreen, usually about 7 to 10 days for like a broccoli, and that has some kind of growing medium, whether it's just a tray, can be a tray, and then it's also grown in light. So those are kind of the main differences. The sprout is 1 to 3 days, and the microgreen is 7 to 10 days for the quicker growing varieties. So here we've got some of our favorite quick growing varieties, and these I would say are really good for beginners because they're easy to grow, they grow quick, and I like to tell people, who say they don't have a green thumb that, it's hard to kill something in less than 10 days. There's always that person that wants to prove me wrong and say I can do it. But for the most part, growing something and taking care of it for 7 to 10 days is totally doable for just about everyone on this planet, I think. So growing microgreens is a really accessible way to garden. It's an accessible way to get your greens. You can get greens in the winter, especially in Minnesota where it's actually pretty nice this week, I guess, but last week it wasn't, it was pretty darn cold. So broccoli, radish, pea, cabbage, arugula, and mustards, those are all really, really good for beginners to start. And that would be like, sometimes you might find like a salad mix, and that would be generally a mix of some of those varieties. If you want to get something a little bit more exotic and a little bit longer to grow, these intermediate varieties, they take a little bit longer time to grow, and they're kind of a fun different flavor profile. So I have mustards on here twice, and the reason for that is not necessarily the length of time for the grow, but sometimes mustards really don't like a lot of water. So if you're a heavy waterer, that's might not be a good one to start with. So that's kind of why it's in the beginning, easy to grow / intermediate category. Once you get into this 28-day category, those really do take a lot of patience. They're really fun to grow because they have a crazy good flavor profile, but you do have to take care of them, I guess. These beginning varieties, I would like to say, are kind of a little bit of a set it and forget it type microgreen, where you can plant it, you can forget about it for a couple days, you can open it up, water it, and it's more than likely it's going to survive and thrive. These 28-day varieties, with the exception of the nasturtium, you do have to care for them. So another question that I get a lot on microgreen seeds before you're planting is about soaking. Sometimes you might read online that you're supposed to soak your seeds or not soak your seeds, or soak them for X number of hours or not X number of hours. It doesn't have to be that complicated. So there's a couple basic things with soaking seeds you have to know, is that it softens it and gets it primed to germinate quickly, and it helps it shed the hull easier. That being said, there's only a few varieties that I personally soak, and those are listed here at the bottom. And for a person that is just starting to grow microgreens, you're probably going to that's probably only going to involve probably like the pea seeds and the sunflower and maybe the buckwheat. Buckwheat's a pretty easy microgreen to grow, but it does have a really hard shell that takes a little bit of effort to pop off. And so soaking that seed kind of helps that process. And I just keep it simple, and I just do an overnight soak. If I'm going to soak a seed, it's going to soak in a jar completely covered with water overnight, and then you drain it when you're ready to plant it. And that's it. I'm not gonna I'm not going to mess with a bunch of timetables and this one soaks for 12 hours and this one soaks for 8. I just, before bed, I soak it and then I plant it in the morning or sometime the next day. It's not as specific as people would like you to believe. And light. I get a lot of people here at the markets when I'm talking about growing microgreens that say that they have a house that has no light. I also have a house that has no light. I have one single window that I consider a good window to grow anything in, but I have tried to grow microgreens in every single window in my house, including our basement egress windows. And I have been able to grow microgreens in every single window of our house. Now they look a little different. Some are a little more peaked than others or longer stems, but they don't need a lot of light. So don't let that fact be a hindrance to you. If you want to grow microgreens, try it out in the lights in the windows that you have. And if you need to add a little bit of a grow light, go for it. And the grow light doesn't have to be anything crazy or complicated. It can just be one of these screw-in grow lights over a kind of like a desk lamp type thing. You don't have to have the long T5 lights and racks and all of that stuff. You can certainly do that if you want. That would be awesome, because growing microgreens is lots of fun and you might get carried away, but you might also say, I enjoy my home and I just want a little bit of light for these greens. So sometimes there's going to be problems. Hold on, did I go too far? Yes, go back here. Yes, I did. There we go. All right, so sorry there, I skipped ahead. So when growing microgreens, I get a lot of people that have tried and they have some problems because sometimes things don't go as expected. And these are going to be four of the most common things that I run into or people have questions on. So uneven germination, mold, drooping microgreens, and fungus gnats. Those are going to be the top problems that you may have if you're growing or have tried to grow. So uneven germination is caused by uneven moisture at the time of planting. So if your seeds dry out during this germination period or not soaking, like your pea seeds, you're going to get uneven germination like this picture. And there's nothing wrong with it. You can keep growing that pot or that tray, and those other seeds may catch up, they may not, but it's not going to harm what's going on. So I would say just keep on. There's no reason to toss that tray. So when you're planting, you want to make sure that your seeds are evenly moist and your growing medium is also wet while you're seeding your tray. Placing a weight on top also helps, and I'll show kind of a lid situation that kind of solves that. And then also purchasing a high quality seed. So if you use just a packet of seeds from Home Depot or whatever, one, it might not be those untreated seeds that you're wanting, or they might just have a low germination rate. And that even happens with the high quality seeds. Sometimes you get a bad batch. If you do get a bad batch, it will not look like this picture. It'll be more interspersed, spotty. Mold. That is a tray of mold, and yes, it's pretty gnarly. That's unfortunately mold. It can happen, and it can happen fast. This tray happened to a mentor of mine, and it circulated around the internet like wildfire because they literally had just checked it the day before. So this is clearly an issue of some type of contamination, contaminated seed. This isn't probably anything that you're going to ever see, But if this happens, just know that it does happen. Some things that cause mold are overwatering, lack of airflow, bad seed, and too high of a temperature during germination. So just after you first plant your seed during those first few days, you just want to make sure that they don't get too hot. So you don't want to put them in, I don't know, say like a spot that gets really sunny, or some people will put them in like a cabinet in their laundry room because it's dark, but it gets kind of hot in a laundry room. You might have heard the term bottom watering. That can come into play with mold if you have a larger size tray, because you don't want to top water your microgreens or water them from the top. All of that moisture, when you see how densely they're planted, it can cause some mold and some moisture issues in there. So we have mold versus a root hair. So this one right here, this yellow tray, looks a little bit spider webby. That one is going to be a mold situation. And that's probably, I had to guess, I would say that's probably just due to the tray being a little bit too wet and a little bit too warm. If that happens to yours, this picture is such a small area, you could just scoop that out with a spoon or a shovel and let the rest of the tray grow, and it would be just fine. If it was a larger part of the tray, I would toss it, but such a small area, if you scoop it out and the rest of the tray continues to look good, you're gonna be fine. So this other picture, the purple here, these are, let me see, these are gonna be radish. And we see a lot of white stuff that a lot of first time or new growers will think is mold. And they think they followed all the instructions and they've done everything right, and they see this white fuzz and they get discouraged and they toss it. Don't toss that tray, because these white hairs here are root hairs. And this is a lot of the stuff that you aren't maybe used to seeing if you're an outdoor gardener, just because you're going to be planting your seeds on top of the soil. So all of this stuff you would normally never ever see because it's going to be underneath the soil. But the way that you plant microgreens on top, you're going to see a whole lot more kind of fun stuff, I think, anyway. But just keep in mind that if you see something white and it's fuzzy, just hang on a second and look at it and try and determine if it looks more like a spider web for mold or if it's coming straight out of that root, like root hairs. Another test that you can do to determine if it's mold or root hairs is spritz a little bit of water on it, and the root hairs they'll collapse, and the spider webby one, it won't really do anything. It'll just collect water and continue to look like a spider web. So drooping microgreens. This tray here desperately needs water. Interestingly enough, that's one of the most common problems is lack of water. And that's also it's gonna depend on the size of tray that you're using. So this tray in this picture is 10 inches by 20 inches. So that's probably considerably larger than a lot of people are gonna first start with. But that kind of type of tray is gonna need a lot of water. And especially around the edges, it's gonna dry out a lot faster. They will perk up though. So that's the good news. That's the really good news. Especially this tray here is radish. Radish is really hardy, and if it looks like you killed it, just water it, and more than likely whatever you've planted will kind of perk up. It might not stand up as straight as it once was, but it will live another day, and you'll probably get to harvest it. This tray here in this picture, I would guarantee that after probably 6 to 12 hours, we'd be just ready to harvest and like nothing ever happened. So some reasons that this happens is your soil dries out. So maybe you used either cocoa coir or the seed starting mix, and in the winter things dry out a lot faster than in the summer. So you just have to kind of keep an eye on things a little bit. Move it if it's got a little bit of a draft. That'll make the edges a little bit droopy too, just moving it out of a draft. So harvesting and storage. Actually, let's do this. So with harvesting your microgreens, you want to do it before they get their second set of leaves. So I'm gonna show you some microgreens and harvest here in just a second. But you can either, if you have a tray of microgreens, you can cut part of it and eat it right away, or you can cut the whole tray and store it in the fridge. And freshly cut microgreens, as long as they're not wet when you harvest them, should last 1 to 2 weeks in the refrigerator, as long as they don't get pushed to the back. So it's a lot different than buying microgreens at the store, or honestly, even at the farmer's market. I harvest the day before the farmer's market, and it's just the travel time and sitting on the table. They are like crazy amounts fresher than the grocery store, but it's never going to be the same as growing and cutting your own. So now that you've grown microgreens, you're going to want to eat them. So these are super easy ways to eat microgreens without a recipe. They're, I get a lot of questions, is it for just a salad? No, absolutely not. It's not just for a salad. I think tacos, sandwiches, and soup is probably my top uses for it. I made a really nice squash soup and topped it with some radish microgreens this weekend. It was really good. Eggs, breakfast sandwich with some microgreens on it is very, very tasty. All right. So we got some planting tips, and then I'm gonna plant a tray here for you and do a little bit of a show and tell. But some tips with the planting is, if you're planting and your seeds are bouncing all around, if you use a spray bottle to kind of moisten that soil, they'll stick a little bit better. This one in red, take time to create a flat surface. This one is, I'm gonna say, is critical. With the amount of seeds that you use for microgreens, you really, really, really want to take extra time in this step. And it might seem a little extra, a little OCD, but if your seeds are spread out evenly, they're going to grow a lot better, and you are going to reduce your risk for mold by a ton, I swear. Because if they all kind of clump together, that's when you're not going to get that airflow that you need. So, soaking those larger seeds. So we'll do a little show and tell, and then I'll come back to this slide here, because this one's a pretty important step-by-step one that's really helpful for people. All right, I'm back. Here we go. All right, so I have here some microgreens that have been growing for a week. Like I said, this is just it's the same chili cup. It's an 8-ounce cup. It's filled with cocoa coir, and this is microgreens after a week. So this is what you could be growing about a week from now, but you can see how absolutely dense this is, and why you want to make sure you have some of that that soil nice and even and flat in the beginning, because if it's all clumped together, you will get mold probably in the middle here. It'd be more likely. And you can see, like, it actually just pulls out. It's got the root structure right in there. So if I were planting, I would take my cup, and you can see there's some kind of divots here. You really want to make sure that they're smooth out. You can press it down so that it's really nice and smooth. See, there's still a little bit there. That's probably pretty good there. And then the seeds that I have here. So this is, I'm going to say it's about 2 teaspoons. So I would use half of this packet, or 1 teaspoon for this 8-ounce cup. So it's going to be a lot of seeds if you're used to thinning and spacing outdoor plants. But you can see how tiny they are. They're just like little grains of sand. And all you have to do is just sprinkle them over your cup. So that you're going to have all of these seeds, and that's going to be how close you want them. So that might be a little bit surprising. And we're not going to cover it with soil or anything. We're just going to leave them right on top there. And to prevent uneven germination, we're going to use a little spray bottle. I have this cute little teeny tiny one, but this guy works pretty good too. But for this little one, we'll just do a little mist. You just want to make sure those seeds are kind of shiny, and you don't have to do anything else once you've misted them. And then in this case, you want to cover them. I have just the cover to that chili cup, and I would just put this on for a couple days, and I would be done. If I was using something like this right here, I would fill the soil to almost to the top, and maybe put like a plate or something on top, just so when those seeds start sprouting, they have something to push against. They like a little bit of weight. And then, yeah, just cover it with a plate or a towel. They would like that. Another thing I like to plant in is berry containers. This one is monstrous because from Costco. I've got some kids that really like strawberries, so it's huge. But it's got, it does have holes in the bottom, which is not a problem. This is actually the larger container you use. You probably want to start getting something with some holes in it, just because it is going to retain a lot of moisture. But in this case, you would want to put down a towel or a plate or something, just so you didn't have such a huge mess. But with this, I would just fill it to the top, plant my seeds, and I would just snap this lid on. And then instead of putting a plate or something on top of it for that weight, the seeds will grow up against the top of this lid. And it's even got, look at that, it's even got a little bit of ventilation built in. It's like your perfect microgreen container right there. Get strawberries and microgreens all in one shot. And then when they're ready, you just pull the top off and you're good to go. I would probably cut the lid off, because knowing me, I would knock this over like a cat. So that would be kind of the planting situation. Now, how do you know when they're ready to let out of the light? So we talked about planting and covering. You want to keep them in the dark for a few days. And then when they're ready to come out, I'm going to show you a tray of microgreens that I just pulled out today. So this is a tray of, this is a big tray. So this is a 10 by 20 inch tray of radish. But you can see that it's going to be yellow, and I would say they're about 1 inch to 1.5 inches tall. This tray is 1 inch deep, but it's not filled all the way with soil. But when they start to push up and get those little leaves, and they are going to look anemic and yellow and kind of a little bit sickly for the first few hours out of the light. But this is when I would uncover them and start giving them light and water for the rest of the grow time. And then by about day 10, this is kind of what you're gonna have. So those leaves are gonna take up the sun and photosynthesize and start to get nice long stems. They may be straight, they may be a little bit curly like this, doesn't really matter. They're just happy little plants. People ask when they know how to harvest or when it's time to harvest. You want to harvest when there's just 2 little leaves there still. Sometimes you'll get if you grow them too long, you'll get a 3rd one growing in there. I don't think I have any that are quite that far along. But so these 2 leaves are the baby leaves. These are called cotyledons. And when you start to get that 3rd leaf, it'll come right up in this V. And that's going to be the first true leaf. And that's when they start to change flavor a little bit. It's still perfectly okay to eat, but they might just be getting a little bit tougher, or some varieties get a little bit bitter. So just kind of look for, you just want 2 little leaves, and then you can give it a little chop chop and you're good to go. So for cutting these guys, I like to use a knife, but you can use a scissors. So I'm going to show you my knife. It's a little dirty right now because I was just cutting some other things. This is just a produce knife. I think it's probably like 12 bucks on, I hate to say Amazon, but probably 12 bucks on Amazon. But this guy is crazy sharp. You do want something that is sharp, and that will help keep the microgreens will last longer. So what happens with scissors, or dull scissors specifically, is it takes this very delicate stem and kind of smashes it and cuts it. Where this guy, like, it's just like butter right through it. You can see it's like just cutting it. I didn't even have to hold it. And then you get a whole handful of microgreens. So I'm going to cut this whole, just going to lap the whole thing off here. But you can watch me massacre this guy, and then we can take a look. So you don't need a lot of force. Then you've got this whole nice hand of really yummy microgreens. Then you can just store those, and then this is what you're left with. You can see how thick it is and how dense. There's so many seeds in there. It's crazy. If you have chickens, they love this. If you do worm composting, they also love this. If you have just a tree out in your backyard and you don't compost, you can totally just pull this out and give your tree some compost. You don't have to be a composter to compost this guy. So I'm going to go back to the slide to that kind of a cheat sheet on what day you do what when growing microgreens. Kind of a step-by-step guide. So this is for kind of a guide for the easier or the quicker growing varieties. So on day 1, that would be planting day. And that would be what we just did, where whatever soil, whatever seed you use, you're going to just get it all set. You're going to cover it up. You're going to put it in the dark. Day 2 to 4, if it starts to dry out, you're going to want to give it a little bit of a spray with a spray bottle, just to keep it from getting like that uneven germination problem that we had in one of those slides. And then if you have a lid or a plate, you want to replace that every day. Around day 4 or 5 is when you would remove the lid and then start watering. So I have 1 to 2 tablespoons depending on container size. So that small container that I had, it's probably about 3 inches. So a container anywhere from like 3 to 5 inches, I would say about 1 to 2 tablespoons of water. And then that's when you're going to want to place it in some bright indirect light. And then days 6 to 8, you're going to watch those babies green up and grow. They're going to grow taller. So when they came out of out of germination. They were probably only about 1 inch tall. They're going to grow and they're going to turn green, or I guess, or whatever color microgreens you have, because there's lots of different colors. In that container that I grew there was broccoli, cabbage, kohlrabi, arugula, mustard. So there's some pretty purples in there too. And then day 7 to 10, depending on variety, is that's when you're going to want to harvest. So the most key to knowing it, like I said, is you want to get it before it gets that third leaf. And that's going to be when it's the most tender and tasty, I guess. We got some tips here. Water around the edges of the cup. So if you're going to top water or just water like you would like a house plant, you want to water around the edges. If you water in the middle, that's when you're going to get mold. If you have a really big tray, or if you have something like that berry container that I showed you, you could bottom water, which just means that you would fill a tray underneath it with water and it would just absorb through those holes that were in there. You can go either way. And then eat your microgreens right away or store them. Just don't let them go to the back of your refrigerator and get frozen, because that's always a sad situation. But if they do get frozen, don't throw them away, because you can keep them frozen and then put them in a smoothie. So just a pinch of frozen microgreens, they still have all of their amazing nutrient content, and it's going to be even more readily available because the cells within the microgreen have kind of burst open from being frozen, and your smoothie is going to be like ultra good. So then here's some additional resources that I think they passed out with some of the handouts before class, but this would just be some resources on places to buy seeds, cocoa trays, and just kind of a general knowledge. Bootstrap Farmer is I would say a trusted resource. There's a lot of, honestly, there's tons of people trying to teach you how to grow microgreens, and I don't want to say they're wrong, but there's a lot of conflicting information and a lot of things that might get you confused. So just going right to a good source is always a nice way to go. And you can always reach out to me as well. I'm more than happy to help people grow, and I want growing to be fun and successful. So I guess if we have any questions, I would love to answer those.
We do have some questions for you.
All right.
Some of the, I think, oops, sorry, volunteers, you know. Let's see. The first one, I saw on Facebook that some have had luck using microfiber cloths as a growing medium. Is there any validity to that? Have you had any experience with that?
I have never used a microfiber cloth to grow microgreens. I would assume that it would be similar to that that hydroponic mat that I showed, where the roots couldn't really penetrate. And in my mind, I'm not sure. To me, it would be wasteful because they couldn't really reuse it, even if the roots penetrated that cloth. There would be really no way you could scrape them off, but they're going to go all the way through those fibers. So it's going to be it's going to be a little bit of a pain to take care of. And if you wash that microfiber cloth in any type of detergent, that's not my cup of tea to grow and eat off of, but to each their own, I guess. But that would be my opinion. I would certainly think that it's absolutely possible, but it's probably not, it wouldn't be my go-to.
Okay. Thank you. Can you compost moldy microgreens?
Absolutely, yeah. Yep. If you get a tray that just big old thumbs down, just toss it in the compost, the whole thing. Just if you have like a reusable tray like this one, and the whole thing moldy and gross, just pop it out, throw it. Make sure to sanitize the tray because you might not be sure why they got moldy. You know, it might be a contamination of the tray, it might be the soil, might be the seed, but it's always good to just kind of, you know, check one box there and make sure that your container is clean if you did have that problem.
Okay. So next question is, do you wet the ProMix soil before you put the seeds on top, or is the misting the only moisture that you give them?
It depends. So if I get the big bale of ProMix, it's usually pretty dry. And so I will add a little bit of water, um, just so it's not like dust. But if it's like I'm standing on them right now, the 25-pound bag of potting mix, usually those have a little bit more moisture in them. And I in that case I wouldn't. So if it kind of sticks together a little bit, I would probably just mist it and be good. But if you pull it out of whatever bag and it's just like a dust storm, I would calm that down before I started planting and misting the top.
All right.
In that case, you would probably just have to mist it really good during germination. You might just notice it drying out faster.
Okay. You talked about using a lid weight, something, a weight on top of a lid. What would you use on your big 1-inch trays?
So on my big trays, so on these guys, it's a 2-tray system. So this tray has holes and you can see some roots coming through there. And then this tray doesn't have holes. And so actually I stack these guys about 6 high. And then I'll put like a paver on top. And then they'll actually move, like, especially if you're growing peas. Peas are strong. But these type of trays, I get these from Bootstrap Farmer, and they come in these big 10 by 20, but they also come in nice little 10 by 10 squares, which I find are a really good size for growing things. In this case, if you just had a big tray or a big container this size, you could use, I would say, if we're going like totally DIY, I would say use like either parchment or wax paper, and then like a piece of cardboard, and then maybe a book. So get creative.
Yeah. So fairly heavy.
Oh yeah, yeah. So when I have the stacks of like 5 or 6, I can put about a 12-pound paver on them, and they're totally fine. This little cup, just the friction, it's a little hard to get off. Just that alone is enough to kind of keep them. It kind of just helps the roots go down.
Okay.
It also helps the seed hulls come off too.
Okay. Do you ever reuse the growing medium?
I don't. So, oh, this is a better one. See if I can do this here. So you got these. There's only about probably a 1/2 inch in here, but the whole thing is gonna lift up. So that's a lot of roots and not a lot. Once you cut this, it's not worth your time. It's definitely better just to compost it and make a happy garden.
So if you had one of those big berry containers, same thing.
You might, so like the berry container, it's a little bit deeper, so you might be able to use some of the stuff from the bottom, but it is, it's still going to be a little bit of an effort for you to get it out because this is about the same depth as that berry container and it just comes out as a hunk.
Sure.
So you might get a little bit, but you might just get frustrated.
Okay. And Hang on a second. All right, what brand of knife do you recommend? Can you tell me the brand name of that knife?
This one is a Mercer. Yeah, this one is a Mercer. And it's called a produce knife. That's just the general shape of it. But it's a really sharp, any sharp knife will do. And there's been a lot of, I was talking about this before the webinar, I've noticed more and more knife sharpener people around, like at the farmers markets. So if you ever see that option, you can probably just take your regular kitchen knife, get it sharpened, and it's probably going to do just fine for you. You just
Okay.
don't want like dull scissors.
You answered part of this, but the question is, how wet is that soil? You know, does it clump together? It's not that wet. Is it just damp?
So when you
Gauge
first, it's when you first plant, it can be any dampness. What's going to really matter is day 1, day 2, day 3, when you look at that, how much you're going to mist after that. So like this one right here, this one is crazy dry. I could absolutely just plant on that and mist it a little bit, and the seeds would be wet and it would be okay. But in the morning, it would look dry. And so I would have to mist it more than, say, like this one, which is a little bit more wet. This one on day 1 after checking it, I might not even have to mist it. There might be enough condensation in there just to kind of keep it happy. So, I mean, you could pretty much plant on something that's like sandy. It's going to be when you check it that day 1, you're going to want to make sure that you definitely add more misting than just a quick. So I always like to have it clump just a little bit, and then when I can pat it down, it kind of forms. So like this one, it doesn't really form. It's still really dry. So I could do it, but this one wouldn't be optimal.
Okay. The next question is about bottom watering and how much water to add, like in a 6 by 6 inch tray. When you talked about the 1 to 2 tablespoons, was that watering around the edges, or was that also
So
bottom
the 1
water?
to 2 tablespoons was for, like, this tray right here is like a 5 by 5. So that would probably be sufficient for either that or this one. Anytime I'm bottom watering, I usually just fill that bottom tray, maybe, I would say, if I had to put like a number on it, I would say a 1/4 inch. Just basically just so it's covered. So like for this big guy here, I would put just enough water so the entire bottom of the tray just had a little bit of water in it. So maybe just a 1/4 of an inch. So if you're using a smaller tray, it's going to be less, but it's still just going to be just a little bit.
Okay. If you have a
And
small, oh, I'm sorry.
with the bottom watering, and you'll see if that water's not pulling all the way up. If you're using like a Pro Mix or a Cocoa, it'll be a lighter color, and you'll just know that you want to add a little bit more water.
Okay. So in a small container, can more than one seed type be planted?
Absolutely. In this container, I think I had probably 6 different seed types. So they were all of that quick growing variety. So you just want to make sure you get something that grows at a similar rate. So all of your brassicas, your mustards, you could even throw a radish in there. Radish grows a little bit faster, but not out of this world faster than like these. You wouldn't want to grow like basil and broccoli together, just because basil takes 4 weeks and broccoli takes 10 days. It wouldn't even out.
Makes sense.
But you
Amy
can
says,
create your own seed mix if you really want, If you see it, if you're like, I really like broccoli and cabbage, but they don't sell that mix, you can do that yourself.
Amy just says, I love Bootstrap Farmer.
They're good. The trays that I've had, they've lasted. Some of them I've had probably since I started, so it was a good investment.
Do you have any recommendations for microgreens with shallow roots for shallow trays? So what would you choose?
I would say the only thing I would not choose, maybe peas. So like I wouldn't grow in anything shallower than like a 1/2 inch to a 1 inch tray. But like I don't even, you probably can't even see, but you can see like I don't even, this is a 1 inch tray, but it's not even full of soil. And I grow all of my varieties in something like this. The only thing that you might run into like with peas is just because the seed is so big, if you have a really shallow tray, they might be popping up above that. But I can't think of a seed that you could not grow in a shallow tray. They all do pretty well. Some might need a little bit more water than others. Radish really likes water. Arugula does not, but I grow them in the same type of tray.
And those trays you said are from Bootstrap Farmer. Is that the brand name or just the
Yeah.
vendor?
Both.
Both.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Do you only harvest microgreens once, or do they ever grow additional leaves so you can get a second harvest or multiple harvests?
That's a really good question. So microgreens unfortunately are not like a grass where you can cut it and they keep growing, but there is an exception, and that would be with pea shoots. And if you cut above that, you're going to get multiple sets of leaves on the peas. If you cut above that first leaf, if you cut above that and leave that one leaf growing, it will grow again, and you can get multiple harvests off of pea shoots. They're generally thinner and a little bit stringier, but I wouldn't turn it down. They're still good.
Okay. Any reason you choose the soup containers and berry containers over the flat container, the shallow container?
I mean, I recommend these just to get people started. If they have, a lot of people have a shallow windowsill, so this usually fits. If you have space, the larger flat trays are amazing. Whether it be a 5 inch, a 10 inch, or a 20 inch, those trays are tons of fun to grow in. One with that, kind of ties back to the person that asked about multiple varieties. If you're going to grow multiple varieties in that tray, I would recommend mixing them together like they were in that grow cup versus growing broccoli on one side and cabbage on the other side. That, to me, it never really worked out as well as it should in my mind. But if you mix those seeds together, it grows great.
Okay. Any guidance, more specific guidance on how densely you spread the seeds?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at my seeds. So it's going to depend on the size of seed, but you want to make sure that they're not all touching. You want to have just a little bit of space between them. So I think Bootstrap Farmer might have a guide for how much like in weight they use for seeds for a certain size container. So like I know like for my 10 by 20 inch trays, I use about a tablespoon of seed for that. Just that seems to work out pretty good for me. but you just want to make sure that they're not like on top of each other, because that's when you're going to get the mold. So just a little bit of space. There's going to be a lot of seeds in there, but you just want to make sure that each one has just a little bit of space around it. And so just kind of sprinkling it, or if you have like a spice shaker, an empty spice shaker, that usually works pretty well too. Or like a Parmesan cheese, it's got the bigger holes.
Okay. So when you were talking about bottom watering, the question was, if the water doesn't all soak up into the soil, do you drain it off or do you just leave it?
If it doesn't soak up, to me, that would mean that that tray is really wet. So then I would dump that off, and that tray might not need to be watered again for a day. I have that happen where you just gets a little bit much, and or it's a little extra humid, but most of the time it will absorb, but you might notice that it's really wet, and if it is wet, it's fine to skip a day or two of watering.
Okay. Right. A question about ventilation. Anything specific, more specific?
So the room that I grow in is probably about 12 by 12, and I don't have any like major fans or anything going. I have in the summertime, I have a dehumidifier that goes constantly in the summertime. And occasionally I'll need to put like a little oscillating fan, but that's about it. I don't do anything crazy with the ventilation. They do sell like little tiny like kind of, I think they call them like a computer fan or something like that. It's probably about 5 by 5. If you have like a growing area or a rack, you can attach that with like a zip tie or something. And it's pretty, I guess, it's not a very powerful fan, but it's enough to kind of keep things going.
You didn't really talk about fungal gnats. Do you have a good cure for that?
So the best cure for that is prevention. And with those, overwatering is the main culprit. Either overwatering, or if you have harvested a tray of microgreens and you let it sit around for a while, like just go compost that guy. There's no need to let it hang out for any amount of time. But just don't overwater. Don't let water sit in your trays. So if you do have that problem where it's not soaking up the water, definitely dump it out. Get rid of that extra water. And if you have trays that are always wet, water less, and maybe add a fan. And those gnats can lay, I think, like 300 or 500 eggs a day. So I know it's when it becomes a problem, it's a problem.
Yeah.
It's it's gross. But if that does happen, the yellow sticky traps always work pretty good. Apple cider vinegar is probably my most useful tip with that one, with getting rid of them if you do have that problem. But keeping your trays not like the Everglades, that would probably be the best way to avoid those. Looks like Pat
Like we
froze.
may,
Oh,
yeah,
there we
looks
go.
like we may have lost Pat. Sorry, Pat, can you hear us? You're frozen.
It's not
All
that
right,
cold.
we'll do one more question and then we'll let you go, Amanda. How do you recommend cleaning the trays in between growing sessions?
So I just use a food grade hydrogen peroxide. So because they just come out pretty well, even with that big tray, there's not a lot of extra stuff. So I have a couple brushes like this that'll just scrub some of the roots out or anything that's kind of left. And then I use just a food grade hydrogen peroxide, and in the winter time, I just use a big sprayer like this. But it doesn't have to, it doesn't really, with the hydrogen peroxide, it doesn't have to soak or sit. You just spray it on there and it's good to go. You don't have to rinse it off. So it's pretty simple.
All right. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for the, oh, Pat's back. Pat, would you like to, can you hear me?
I am so sorry. All of a sudden, my computer just died. I apologize.
That's okay. We were just about to wrap up. Do you want to do the closing?
Sure.
All right.
Thank you so much, Amanda,
Oh, you're
for
welcome.
your wonderful presentation, and to everyone else for joining us tonight. You'll receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to the recording of tonight's webinar and a survey. So we'd really appreciate it if you'd complete that survey and give us your feedback so we can continue to improve as we go along. On behalf of the Minnesota State Horticultural Society and our presenter, thank you for joining us today, and come back again. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.